Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome to Courageous Custody, your weekly dose of empowerment and practical guidance. I am Renee Rodriguez, creator of the Custody Blueprint, divorce mediator, and parent coordinator.
And I am Achara Tarfa, a level 3 trained internal family systems practitioner and co-founder of GTI, the Global Trauma Institute. And Renee and I are here because we understand the unique challenges that protective parents face in the courtroom. Our mission together is to equip you with strategic thinking and emotional support that you need to navigate this difficult journey with strength and resilience.
So every Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern, we're going to go live on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook, bringing you inspiration and insight from stories about courageous parents who have walked in your shoes and emerged victorious in big ways and small, and practical strategies from us to help you advocate for your children and manage your trauma as you go through your custody case. So let's dive in.
Let's dive in.
We are not giving legal advice or therapy.
No, and if you do feel triggered, we want you to take care of yourself.
So today's topic, I'm so excited for this topic. I'm very excited about it. That's all I'll say. How mental injury shows up for protective parents. It just feels like something that we don't spend enough time talking about and how it appears in court. So I'm excited that we're chatting about this today.
Yeah, it's really important, to understand that there is a difference between mental injury and mental illness.
Yeah.
And so today we get to talk about what mental injury is and why does it even matter? And it matters because mental injury is the psychological and emotional harm that results from prolonged stress, coercive control, and trauma. All of these things are often inflicted in high conflict custody battle, or as I like to call it, and we like to call it here, post-separation abuse. And unlike physical abuse, mental injury can be harder to prove in court, but its effects on parents and children are profound. Protective parents, often the moms, right? Often moms are the ones that are the primary caregivers and have a history of being the primary caregiver, may experience chronic stress, PTSD symptoms, hypervigilance, self-doubt, especially after being in a situation where they are what we also know as being gaslit by an abusive narcissistic co-parent, basically making it seem as though what you're seeing and what you're experiencing is not really happening. And that can cause these mental injuries over time. Family court, how they treat mental injury, they don't. The challenge of proving mental injury is really difficult. Courts prioritize evidence, and emotional harm is often dismissed without medical records, without psychological evaluations, or professional testimony. And I want to name that oftentimes, if those things are done, they're often weaponized against the parent. So high conflict, quote unquote, labeling, that comes in when protective parents who express distress, they can often be labeled as the one that's high conflict, instead of being seen as really trauma survivors who are advocating for their children's safety. So it's really important to understand that the family court doesn't even have a concept of mental injury, really. And the system often requires that the injured parent, the parent who has been the one suffering, to prove that they've been suffering, to prove that they've been harmed, while all the while appearing completely calm and collective. And that really places an emotionally unfair burden upon them. Some evaluators who come in to these custody cases, they may misinterpret trauma responses, such as anxiety or hypervigilance, as someone who's unstable or emotionally dysregulated, rather than recognizing them as these are impacts and results of coercive control. This is a result of mental injury.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I was just saying. And oftentimes this mental injury shows up in the parent, the protective parent. Since we deal with moms most, it typically is seen in the mother.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Go
And
ahead,
I
Renee.
think,
I didn't want to interrupt you.
and I think with when we do have the protective moms as well, one of the things we need to consider is that having that trauma show up in a woman then really, really helps the narrative of the other side of emotional instability.
Absolutely. That goes back to that weaponizing. See, I told you she was this way. See,
Mhm.
I told you, Bobble. And then these I told you so's. And then oftentimes moms will, again, it's this cumulative impact where the system will enable it to occur. And then we've got now upon that shame and guilt. And it's this constant, am I actually moms question themselves all the time, which then attacks their sense of
Yeah.
agency for themselves and their kids. And so I want to just normalize that that is the way that the system is set up. And so until the courts have an idea or a concept of mental injury and they believe, right, like that it even can happen, then we're going to be in the situation where this production of evidence to prove the mental injury is going to continue because it's like, okay, you say that, prove it. And parents often experience these parts of themselves that are their manager parts that are really trying to hold it all together. While simultaneously, it can also occur in the next sentence that, like, except for example, under cross examination or when you're on the stand, even just sharing your side, these firefighter parts can engage in sort of just, maybe numbing to just cope with what's going on while you're there. Being in an environment in a courtroom is in itself can be traumatic for a nervous system. So the self-doubt parts, the inner critic parts can come in, and there may be these internalized messages of it's me, or if I was just stronger or more resilient, or maybe I'm overreacting, or maybe I'm failing. Oh my goodness, look, I'm not a good mom. These messages can just sort of embed themselves, and they're not messages that are there inside innately because moms know they're great primary caregivers. It's when these messages are placed upon them. And then that gaslighting and that self doubt and that inner critic can often appear because they're being gaslit externally, which is part of that mental injury and coercive control process. That external gaslighting becomes internal. Yeah, we see that a lot.
I think it
And
makes it very difficult for we already don't want to believe, the statistics. Now we now know from the statistics that um, the courts in the past were, there was a belief that they were biased against men, when the reality is that there was just the tender age doctrine, and that's the way society was set up. So it wasn't really
right,
a bias against anybody. It was just the social constructs, right? But we know now we've reached a point where moms are put under the microscope, and they know it. So when we talk about the abused moms, we don't want to leave out the abused dads, but let's take a moment to talk about when we see the women who show that trauma, and it's much more harshly judged.
way more harshly judged and weaponized against the women. That mental injury that shows up for these protective moms come in the form of parts of overwhelming, these self-doubt, these inner critics that I talked about. There's a sense of chronic hypervigilance that can be weaponized as to, oh, she's being quote unquote controlling, right? And again, like I said, that guilt and shame can really kick in because there's a sense of I'm not doing enough to protect my child from this person. I'm not doing enough. When in actuality, a mom is often doing all she can with the system that she is working within and the person that she is dealing with. So, those are some ways in which mental injury can show up for these protective moms. One of the ways that we can resource and sort of provide support when working with this mental injury is to talk about self energy in a sense of knowing that innately inside, everyone has a self that's not damaged, it's undamageable. and encouraging parents to really access a sense of self-energy through practices of grounding. Maybe they have a therapist, maybe they themselves are engaged with, it's parts work, and they have an ability to sit with the different parts of themselves in a calm, clear, compassionate way. And acknowledging that hypervigilance, or parts of them that are wanting things to be done in a specific way, are really doing their best to protect them. And those parts need some reassurance and support, not suppression. Oftentimes what will come in is internalized other manager parts that are in opposition, that go, you're being too much, you're being XYZ. So recognizing the dynamic and the relationship between parts of themselves, and providing support, can really help gain clarity and access self-energy. And there's another part that I want to talk about, which is the legal and emotional parallel strategies. So really balancing these strategies, which is what you do, Renee, right? We talk about what you do, documenting incidents, preparing that strategy, with the emotional resourcing. So again, parts work or body work or community support. And often what I've been finding, and Renee, I'm sure you too, which is why we work together in what we do, you either have one or the other. You don't typically have a combination of where somebody is helping balance these sort of legal strategies and also helping you with the emotional strategies.
No, and I think we see the way that comes out. We've got protective parents who are trying to put together their case, but the mental injury that we're talking about gets in the way of any legal strategies they might be trying to form. It, in fact, we see almost complete paralysis sometimes in order to even be able to go over all of the evidence that people have, because in doing so, you're reliving the abuse, right? One of the things that I noticed, we have, I'm working with someone, her name is Mandy. Mandy, basically, in our last meeting, she said, the thing of it is that I was smart enough. I found out early enough that I need to document everything. But one of the things I've discovered about documenting everything is that as I go back to try to put it together for my case, I'm looking at things that I had forgotten happened, that I blocked happening. And I now have to relive stuff that I had forgotten. And it's amazing to me that I forgot this in the first place because of how awful and egregious that day was. And yet I would never have remembered to put this in my body of evidence. But then, even though she's got that there, she's telling me about the fact that she can't seem to be able to put together her materials for her lawyer. I mean, look, there are lots of reasons to be mad at your legal team, and there are lots of reasons to realize that, unfortunately, your legal team can only do what they've got in their hands, right? They can only do anything with what they've got. And if you are, so mentally injured you have so much trauma, so heavy that you can't even move forward with your case, you're paralyzed, and it hurts your case.
It does. And I think distinguishing that, I have a mental injury, I don't have a mental illness, even though this is what maybe externally the world, the system is trying to tell me about. No, I actually have a mental injury because of what I've been going through, and the system hasn't caught up.
That much trauma.
Yes, helps to counter shame. So I think this topic of mental injury is so important, because, like you said, it's often a paralysis, right, that ends up happening because it's hard to navigate through memories that you documented, that you had suppressed, and that you come back now and you're putting it out there for your case. And it's like, oh, wait a minute, that happened. And so now I'm in a space where I have to emotionally deal with that, because when it was happening, in order to survive, a part of me knew I needed to block it. Now I'm past that. It's not happening right now, but I'm gathering the evidence, because the court needs my evidence of the abuse. And so that's hard sometimes to deal with and
And we
process.
also have a lot of parents who the mental injury causes physical illness, and that also gets in the way of the case and parenting.
Yeah, absolutely. So really building an internal and an external group of allies So whether that's through, seeking someone who is IFS trained to help you understand the parts inside of you that are, struggling and needing you to bring harmony and support so that you can have your internal sense of self, or whether that's support groups externally, divorce strategist coaches, community, safe people. Oftentimes, unless it's someone who's been through a situation that you have, people aren't going to understand. So I want to normalize that too. So if you go seeking community and they don't get it, or they're providing you maybe you'll get through this or some other sort of toxic positivity things that aren't so great and aren't so helpful, oftentimes it's helpful to find people who have been through sort of a similar situation. And what I love about the Custody Blueprint is that we get to do that, right? We have mindset calls with like-minded people who understand the unique challenges of navigating the court while they're healing from abuse. And, family court may not fully recognize mental injury, but protective parents can learn to advocate for themselves while they're healing from within.
I do think, if I may,
Yeah.
when you talk about building allies, I just wanted to pop in and I just wanted to say that I think we do have to recognize that most of these protective parents have been purposely isolated. And so many of them are often moved very far away. And when they look back at their stories of how they got moved back far away, you can see the red flags there already. You can see that type of thing. But I think a lot of the protective parents that we're working with, these are people who have nobody. They've been isolated for so long. There's estrangement, and there's just been an inability to maintain relationships throughout their time with their abuser.
Yeah. And that isolation, there might be parts that go, I don't even know first thing where to look for external support and validation. Right. I just got here, or I've lived here 2 years and I don't know a soul. Right. So yeah, that's really important, Renee. And, the goal is not to just survive the custody battle, but to thrive beyond it for the person, the protective mom and their child, reclaiming a sense of who they are, providing inner stability for themselves and for their child, which is what they can do. What they can do, regardless if the court doesn't understand or doesn't provide support for mental injuries. Just knowing that, there is a mental injury. Oh, wait, I don't have a mental illness. And it's because the system around me doesn't recognize what actually my experience has been. So, yeah.
Well, I think that's all for this week's episode of Courageous Custody. But before we go, thank you so much for joining us, whether live or on replay. We are so grateful to have helped in any way we may have. We have some great takeaways for this week, Doc. I think, when it comes to our takeaways for this week, what's really important is to think about how family court treats mental injury and take a look at how it's showing up for yourself. Deal with finding resources, finding people, and finding your support.
Absolutely. Great job recapping that, Renee. Next week, join us again at 7 p.m. Eastern here. Like or follow or bookmark us so that you can get the notifications and not miss a thing, because what we're talking about might just catch you right when you need it.
Yes, and leave your comments below. And wherever you are listening, remember you're not alone. Until next week, stay strong, stay informed, and keep fighting for what matters most. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.